Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 2 of Book 1, Mark II. Like, subscribe, comment down below, and share the story with those who you think might like it. Chapter 2, A World Old and New. Coco's request for an 81mm mortar had apparently been approved. The next full day after the men had come back through the Vale, multiple crates were found waiting for them and were jerked through completely before anything odd happened to them. The tube itself had seen better days and the ground plate looked like it had been run over, but the militia volunteers were more than happy to take these army sloppy seconds and put them into an advantage position. There were plenty of spare spaces up on the top side of the cave's mountain that could play home to the beat-up mortar, and a spot was found quickly. After all the shovel work they had done so far, digging a nice little hole for their new favorite toy to sit in was but another day on the other side of the Vale. With the mortar came a few boxes of HE and illumination rounds, just in case they needed to see something coming at night where the flashlights couldn't reach. All around the cave entrance, the small company of troopers had dug trenches and foxholes, using rotations of volunteers who occupied them and kept watch over the entryway to their encampment. A few pet projects were coming along as well, such as a faux general store that was nothing more than a stack of crates and a person inside to log how much ammunition and water there was, as well as a latrine around the other side of the hill. Yule didn't like the fact that someone had made a sign stating designated pooping log in front of a large fallen tree hewn to have places to sit, but he figured it was just a morale thing. Yule also noted, as he touched the reconstituted coffee to his lips, that the volunteers were already making this place into a home. Someone had made a sign reading "Welcome to Fort Kickass, No Elves Allowed" near the front of the little camp. He also noticed with much annoyance that someone had actually dragged a body pillow here, as well as outfitting it with an actual rifle, helmet, and a spare chest rig.
Good thing Megaman can pull sentry duty with us,
Yule supposed, though his face soured just looking at the thing.
Come on, mate. What kind of place would this be without a waifu in the mix?
Yule looked over his shoulder at the Australian sitting sprawled out in the grass behind him, having seen Yule staring daggers at the body pillow. I don't believe I asked for your opinion, Cockrum. Jovial, Australian-flavored laughter bounced off Yule's back as he began to walk away to inspect the fortification lines. It was honestly a miracle that the kangaroo kicker had even made it into the outfit, having sold everything he owned and burned every favor he had to get a ticket to the United States with a fake vacation visa. Yule found himself bored just walking around the camp, but saw a number of troopers had started digging a pillbox, so he took off his uniform shirt and jumped in with them. It was something to do and built camaraderie with the people he had to co-command, so he found it easy to whittle away the hours with them. After a good amount of digging and filling sacks with dirt, he sent out a small team of troopers to go forage for branches and sticks, then gave the woman he put in charge of them strict orders to make sure they didn't go too far. As Yule was helping stack sacks of earth to create the walls of the pillbox, his coffee pouch steaming happily nearby, Cole finally arrived and made his report. He had been sent off to scout around the area with Killjoy and Cody, and the three had been admonished for the obvious name they tried to give themselves. Yule stood up, dusted the dirt off of his pants and hands, and walked up the rough earthen entryway into the pillbox, picking up his retort pouch on the way out. "Ah, Mr. Cole," Yule drawled out in a friendly manner. "Did you find any sign of anyone else around?"
No, sir. No signs of anyone else that got snatched up by whatever killed the rescue team,"
Cole said, waving to Killjoy and Cody, who made their way towards the stoves. Yule nodded, leaned backwards to pop his back, then gestured with the coffee pouch towards where the rescue team's remains were now buried. Any idea how long they were out here? Cole rubbed his palms together as he thought, formulating the words in his head for a few seconds before speaking.
Not just before we arrived, but certainly some time before. The bodies were kind of decomposed, but not as much as they should have been for how long they've been missing for.
Yule raised a brow as he took a sip from the retort pouch of coffee. The time from when the rescue team was cut off to the time they arrived had been relatively short for government work, but the bodies should have been a little more decomposed in such mild weather. Then again, they had also been eaten. Yule knew there were other factors that could be in play after what Coco had experienced, none of which he particularly liked. Mr. Cole, are you implying we're dealing with a big ball of wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey stuff? Cole shrugged.
To some degree.
Yule hummed and tapped the corner of his retort pouch to his chin. This did explain how that 81mm mortar was approved so fast, or how they got all their supplies together so quickly, despite the other side of the cave having been out in the sticks of coal country. Thank you, Mr. Cole, that's all I need. Cole gave Yule a lazy salute, but Yule didn't return it. This was a militia, after all, and Yule didn't even hold a rank besides co-commander with Coco. This was only because he was one of the few older guys in the outfit, and he'd be damned if others were going to call him sir. Later that night, all who were not on watch or sleeping gathered up near the middle of the camp. Those who had not yet eaten took that moment to rip open MREs and sneak in a late-night supper, having been too busy digging in the ground like demented moles earlier in the day. In front of them was one of the tech geeks, or as most of the camp called her, the Gremlin. Gremlin was a very slight woman, mostly muscle and sinew at 5'1", but she knew her shit and also owned a stockpile of personal drones that she had brought with her through the veil. They had been a bit quirky since passing through the odd portal and kept fighting against her commands in order to chase bugs or harass birds. It had taken her days to do a full system check and reboot of the drones, but even still it was a fight to make them pay attention to orders. During the day she had thrown up a pair of the monster quadcopters, which had been circling in an ever-growing radius around the camp and feeding information to her little set of tough books and gaming laptops. Piece by piece, she was building a map of the area with actual pictures taken from her drones, and it was all coming together in the murky gloom of the night. There were a few chuckles from the men and women around her when a picture was of a pissed-off bird or fleeing beetle, but Gremlin pressed on. Due to the desire of keeping the base hidden from any locals that may have been present, Fort Kickass had a policy where no campfires were to be lit during the day or night, the camp relying instead on chemical heaters and jet stoves to warm things up or cook. With the unending darkness around them, the lights from the 6 laptops threw eerie shades of green and blue onto the small group behind Gremlin, of which Yule and Coco were a part of. This time, both Yule and Coco had retorts of coffee, and somehow Coco had found a silly straw which he used to slurp his field mocha with. Lots of trees so far, plenty of open plains, more hills behind us. Yule muttered to Coco, his thick mustache perched on top of his retort pouch. Coco's silly straw gurgled as he stopped drinking, gesturing with the pouch at the map slowly filling up the screens.
And there's a village right there to consider. Looks to be rustic. I don't see any metal roofs or anything, and those are clearly some kind of animal pulling carts.
Yule nodded slightly, now chewing worriedly on the lip of the pouch. Thinking Iron Age, Middle Age. Those buildings look like something you would have found in a French village during Charlemagne. Coco chucked his teeth a few times before he spoke.
Definitely Middle Ages, which means we can keep fire superiority.
Yeah, until one of those sons of bitches throws a fireball at us or some shit, Yule growled. Gremlin, Coco, and everyone else around the laptops laughed quietly, and after a few more minutes, Gremlin had the maps printed out and in the co-commander's hands. It was thanks to Gremlin they could even get some kind of electrical power going, as she knew how to work the little wind generator that happily spun and whizzed 20 feet above them on a pole. Yule was curious as to how the "no weenies allowed" and Gadsden flags also got up there under the generator, but no one wanted to own up to it, and he just didn't have the fucks to spare when it came to taking it down. Besides, if anything living saw the flags and tried to make contact, they would be facing the bristling guns of Fort Kickass. After conversing with Coco a bit more about the village, they both agreed that they should at least put it under some kind of observation, just to see what is going on there and what kind of people inhabit the place. It was within enough of a distance that some form of overlap was inevitable, and if they ever let loose the entire firing line worth of rifles into a target, there was no way the village would not hear the crack and pop of ordnance turning some goblin into jelly. When the maps were all in hand and all the fun over, the small gaggle of troopers dispersed as Yule slowly walked in the dark towards his own hooch he had dug into the ground. Yule groaned as he kicked back onto his sleeping system, bundling his wool camping blanket behind his shoulders and head to prop him up. He had a small light attached to the roof of his little camping hooch and clicked it on to the red setting, casting Yule in a grim crimson light as he looked at the maps. "Mystery village to the west," he sighed, draining the last of his coffee pouch. "Empty, mysterious forest to the north and east, and us." He tapped a finger where the camp lay to the south on its little range of hills. "Gonna have to send someone over to keep an eye on this fucking place. Just hope they're as friendly as I want them to be." The night crept on as sentries changed rotations. Men and women chatted as they gathered around the softly glowing lights of stoves, and human eyes peered out into the dim of the distant, unknown land. Alrighty, so your job is to take a looky-loo at the town or whatever it is, let us know what's going on, and then boogie on home. Any questions? Yule stood before the gaggle of 8 men and women before him, one hand in his pocket as another held a protein bar, his fingers fiddling with the wrapper. He didn't mind the first strike bars that cropped up in the MREs, but they really did a number on his teeth just trying to chew through them. The group was hand-picked from the volunteers who had the best cardio and optics, 3 of which were men and 5 were women. The women were avid joggers and runners and had the legs to prove it, judging from the contours of their uniform trousers. 2 of the men were fun runners, their rifles sporting long-distance optics that could peer down into the town from an advantage position. One of the men was Domino. He was not a fun runner, but was just super eager to get a scope on something breathing in this realm. Yule could understand his eagerness, as they had expected to be besieged by goblins and slathering beasts as soon as they came out of the Vale, but so far it had been mostly a group camping trip while trying to lure in strange birds with pieces of MRE crackers. A bubbly blonde held up her rifle and her camera phone at the same time.
"Are we allowed to take pictures?"
"Yes," Yule said flatly, feeling that there were even more dumb questions to follow.
"Are we allowed to kill them if they become hostile?"
asked one of the men, who idly rubbed a finger along the eyepiece rim of his scope. "I'd prefer if you didn't. Just try to wing them or something and make a quick getaway. Remember, the key here is not to get seen and to just report," Yule said while eyeing them, his patience running short almost immediately. He'd failed to realize just how bad his back was, and sleeping on the ground was no longer suited to him. It was starting to make him crankier in the mornings and warping away his patience to boot. After ironing out some of the other small details of the mission, he sent them off, and they went happily jogging away from Fort Kickass. There was some mild jeering as well from those on sentry duty, half of whom had their comic books or mangas out to take advantage of the morning sunlight to read. A few others leaned out of the field shower, squinting out at the figures loping through the grass. As the sounds of boots hitting the ground faded away, Yule heard the chunks of actions being worked from up on the hill and saw the crew serfs were taking the time to do daily maintenance. He had to yell at them yesterday because they were doing it all at once, but today they were thankfully doing it one at a time. That way only one weapon was down compared to all of them at once. He blinked blearily into the sky and sniffed, bringing the protein bar to his mouth as he thought to himself. It was probably good that he sent the group off with 2 sets of maps, as the last thing he needed was a bunch of trigger-happy commandos walking around Fantasyland looking for a reason to split some poor creature's face apart, or worse.
Well, good morning, sunshine.
Coco crooned with a smile and Yule rolled his eyes in response. Coco continued on, shaking a retort pouch of rehydrating coffee.
Did you send out that group of runners already?
Yule nodded as he chewed, turning to observe the finishing touches on the pillbox. They're out on mission and should be back before dark. I told them to avoid shooting anyone, but something tells me my hopes may be too high.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Coco said cheerfully, clapping a hand to Yule's shoulder.
We're all very well adjusted here, after all.
Oh, I wonder what color their brains are!
The bubbly blonde said happily as she jogged along, her custom HK-417 rifle waggling back and forth on her shoulder.
When you think about it, they don't even have to be pink. They can be blue, or green, or yellow.
The team jogged gamely across the plush grasslands of the field and didn't even break much of a sweat thanks to the cool, fresh morning air that they gulped down in thankful lungs. The travel was mostly silent, with nothing more than the jangle of canteens, the odd sentence or two from the runners, or the rattle of magazines to break the silence. Using the maps, they were able to recognize some terrain features and use them on the move, not needing to stop to take out the compass, and had an easy time dead reckoning their way to the village. When they finally arrived 300 yards away, they broke line of sight and crawled through the brush the rest of the way, finding a nice clear spot to peek out of. Ahead of them on the edge of the village, figures were going about their morning dailies, heeding or paying no mind to those who watched them from the hidden undergrowth of the tree line.
Farmers, eh?
Whispered Domino as he looked down the optic of his rifle, training the mill-dot sight along behind a man who was carrying a bundle of wood. He felt a tickle and looked to his right hand, spying a stick bug swaggering back and forth up his hand in an odd dance.
Can I help you, sir?
Very curious. Look at their ears.
Murmured another volunteer, a raven-haired woman who everyone called Kentucky due to her father owning a chain of fried chicken restaurants.
They're really low. Elves, maybe? To me, they look like elves.
Gabriel, who lived in Georgia but was from Idaho, flicked back and forth between his optic settings as he watched a woman splash a bucket of water along a small garden of vegetables.
Definitely elves, but I expected fancier elves. You know, Lord of the Rings and all that.
The group quietly chatted to each other while the bubbly blonde, who went by Chicks, busily snapped pictures with her phone, holding the camera near the eyepiece of her scope.
I don't know, they look like elves to me, but with just longer ears. Can you guys imagine it? Those are elves down there! Real ones! Oh, I bet the men are cute!
Of course, that's where your head goes.
Domino muttered, now moving his head back and forth in time with the stick bug. Kentucky snorted.
Like you aren't thinking the exact same thing. Why the hell do you think we members of the fair sex came along on this trip? To buy handbags and sample perfumes?
We came for man flesh.
Chicks said in a growly voice, smiling brightly and chewing her gum loudly.
Delicious fantasy man flesh.
Gabriel grinned.
What about their legs? They don't need those.
They are not for eating.
One of the other male snipers grumbled out, holding up a gloved finger as he watched down his scope.
The elves go to Yule, alive and unspoiled.
Chicks wiggled her feet back and forth behind her in the air.
Oh, they aren't going to be unspoiled for long. Not when I get them in my sights.
Jesus Christ, chicks.
Another female scout guffawed into the grass, resting her forehead on the grass to muffle her snorting giggles.
You're why the aliens never came to visit us, I swear to God. They went puttering by an Atmo, looked down, saw you, and went, nope.
They sat and watched the elves for hours, and those down in the sprawling buildings went about their village routines. The place was definitely more elvish up close, with many of the houses sporting long, spiraling carvings, the windows seeming to be more for show than actual use, and even the animals they used seemed more alive than what anything on Earth would be. What was truly strange was how normal they looked compared to the expectations of the humans who watched them from afar. There wasn't much spell casting or great feats of magic, but regular people going about their lives. Children giggled and played in the streets or yards of the homes, long-limbed dogs barked and chased after them, and the parents watched from time to time while working. Every home had its own little plot of land. Each had their own little gardens, and every elf seemed to have made it their own in one way or another. A house would be sporting a fish theme, another a bird theme, each one attempting to convey the thoughts and feelings of those who lived within. They reckoned the village must have had around 200 or so elves in it, and may have been exporting some kind of grain, judging by the amount of fields that surrounded the little cluster of homes. The group spotted a decently wooded area nearer to the village and low-crawled to it, keeping their heads low just to make sure they weren't spotted. Each human pressed the sides of their faces to the grass, keeping one eye open as they slowly inched along the soft, tickling blades. Chicks had been chewing bubble gum the entire time, which caused a few pucker factor moments when she forgot she couldn't blow bubbles, but the team made it to the other wooded area with no alarm being raised. Chicks went back to taking pictures while everyone else scoped in on the bigger buildings near the center of the village, the largest of which they assumed was an inn, judging by the amount of elves around it. The closer the buildings got to the center of the village, the more elaborate the carvings and themes became, many of which sported wooden carvings of animals that grazed or frolicked in the small, tidy front yards.
Bet you would sell one of our souls for a bet in that.
Kentucky said with a chuckle, and focused her own reticle on a pair of elves sitting outside of the inn on a bench table.
He has been an absolutely grumpy asshole having to sleep outside every night.
The two elves were smiling happily as they drank from artistically made mugs, talking to each other in a laid-back fashion, and Kentucky found herself unable to follow the language as she read their lips.
Not sure why you're so surprised.
A female scout said.
They gave us a 60-year-old granddad to lead us. I'm surprised he didn't cross over with a Caine and a pill minder.
He's not that old.
Domino giggled to himself, his own eye glued to his optic as he watched an elven woman hang up her laundry. The long, flowing sheets had attacked her and swallowed her within the billowing cloth, and she was having a time of it. The elf tried getting out of it the calm way, but ended up ripping it off the line with a grimace and a bark of angered language.
He would certainly growl less. Man-bear-pig at its finest.
From this close, they got an actual good look at the elves. They were pretty, for certain, but many of them had rugged features that compared nicely to their lines of work and the general feel of the village. Their ears were lower on their heads, longer, and went more sideways than up at a high angle. Their hair seemed to always be braided, and the men actually sported small, rugged beards that were adorned with some kind of bead. Gabriel spotted one such man sitting on a small chair outside of his home, and the elf seemed to be whittling himself a new pipe of some kind. Next to him, a large jug sat nearby, out of which the elf would refill a cup he drank from.
They look a lot like Finns, but friendlier.
The team all guffawed at each other silently, but kept taking down notes in field books. Besides whatever it was they farmed here, they also seemed to be breeding horses. They hadn't seen them yet, personally, but on the other side of the village were what looked like racks and racks of stables, and further out could be seen big herds of multicolored forms that ran around on occasion. They were sleek-looking creatures that looked well tended after, as far as the volunteer group of humans could tell from this distance, anyway. Hell, even the damn chickens looked elvish, their feathers way too sleek and clean when compared to anything they had back home on Earth. Kentucky silently whistled to herself as she panned her reticle over a pair of brightly colored fowl, the birds pecking at the ground while strutting around.
Wonder how they taste in secret herbs and spices.
Again, quiet laughter was shared amongst the team, but was cut short when a distant rumble and boom was heard.
Y'all hear that?
Gabriel snapped, twisting his head to look behind him. The sound was constant now, a chorus of booms and thuds that sent chills running up and down their flesh and goosebumps. Gunfire. The echoes of gunfire and battle were reverberating in the distance, and it could only be coming from one place.
Movement! Lots of movement!
Chick said in a slightly higher tone than what she usually used, and was looking down the scope of her rifle.
The whole village is coming around!
She saw the people in the village perking up to the noise, and they seemed to be worried, some of them running through their homes and fetching what looked like long, elegant spears. The entire village had heard the noise as well, and Chicks could only assume that they had no idea what it was, but knew it couldn't be anything good. Children ran and ducked into homes, mothers bundled up babies into their arms and went for cover, and the able-bodied men and women began gathering weapons from wherever they had them stored.
Wait, let's not head out yet. We need to see what kind of firepower they're packing,
Gabriel said, while beside him Kentucky rose up to her feet. She leaned against the tree and rested her rifle on a branch, panning her scope along the mustering figures.
Longbows, spears, and I see armor. I also see a few crossbows, but no gunpowder weapons.
I see some figures wearing no armor or weapons,
Gabriel said coolly, then jerked backwards when an elf snapped his fingers, summoning two spectral deer-looking animals to his side.
Magic!
Fuck that, time to go.
Domino cheered and picked up his M24 as he stood. Element of surprise now gone, they stood up and immediately began to sprint back to Fort Kickass at full speed, paying no mind to the cries of the villagers behind them. The elves down below had seen the shadows lurch up from the ground, but stood firm, even if their curiosity burned. "Mortars! Get that fucking mortar going!" roared Yule as he waved his arms at the team up on the hill, while even now troopers were running to their positions in multiple manners of dress. The M2 was barking its challenge along with the spinning M249s and M240 Bravos arranged around it, as together they whipped a stream of leaden death down below at the direwolves charging Fort Kickass. At first there had been only two of the things making a run for the camp, but as they were cut down by the first opening volley, three packs had materialized from the woods as an answer to the affront. The hulking things had come up so fast and suddenly that the camp defenders barely had time to register what was even coming at them, costing them precious seconds to lay down their fields of fire. AR-15s, AK-47s, and World War II bolt-action rifles roared in defiance to the bays of the direwolves charging at them from below.
I'll give you that.
Coco yelled, slamming a fresh magazine into his foul as Cole ripped a pin out of a grenade, holding it tight to his chest as he fired his rifle with one hand, resting the forward grip on a sandbag.
They're bigger than polar bears.
The 50 caliber rounds from Betty slammed home into the charging pack of direwolves, ripping chunks of meat and fur away in great gouts of crimson that spilled down onto the grass and rushing paws below. But it took a lot of concentrated fire to bring even one down. Yule saw one volunteer fire a Mosin at a direwolf that was over 150 yards away, and then watched the 7.62 by 54R round loudly ricochet off the skull of its target. The direwolf lurched to either side, clearly stunned by the weight of the round, then tumbled to the grass in a cartwheel of paws. Yule grimaced at the thought that this thing had a skull tough enough to bounce such a powerful round, but thankfully the mortar team had figured itself out and finally belched out its first round fired in anger. The high explosive round took a while to come down due to its arc, but with luck they managed to bring it down 100 yards in front of the trench network and right beside 2 charging direwolves. Direwolves were tough, but they weren't 81mm high explosive round tough. The mortar rent the ground apart and the 2 direwolves were blown into ragged giblets of meat by the shockwave of the round, the shrapnel from it screeching through the air and doing the rest of the job with ease. The military veterans didn't even flinch when the round came down, while others dived for cover, their weapons clattering down beside them. When the dire wolves were almost on top of them, Coco turned to look at Cole while waving a bladed hand out past the battle line.
Grenades! Do it now or we die!
Cole threw his grenade, as did many others, and the angry balls of fragmentations did their intended purpose on the dire wolves, tearing muscle and meat away from bone and body. Ripples of concussive air played a tune of death and destruction on the ears of the living as the grenades cooked off, sounding as if a giant was tap dancing on the graves of the beasts that were so folly to charge the lines. Their charge staggered, and the direwolves gave a deadly pause, allowing Betty to rake across the rearmost remaining direwolves that still drew breath into their huge lungs. This, however, did nothing to stop the 3 direwolves that managed to make it past the trench line. Yule whipped around and started firing with his M9, pounding rounds into the side of a direwolf's head as it tried to snap down onto the shoulders of a screaming trooper. It still tried to bite down, but thankfully missed the shoulder, instead grabbing hold of the man's plate carrier. Yule finally landed a round into the beast's eye, and the direwolf shook its head with a howl, sending the man in its jaws cartwheeling through the air and landing with a woof of air leaving his lungs, rolling along the ground until he came to a stop against a crate. The men and women around Yule turned and focused their fire onto this direwolf, cleaving through the beast's legs until they shattered wetly. The direwolf going down with another agonized howl and a scrabbling of broken leg bones. On the other side of the trench network, Coco was hammering the stomach of a direwolf with his foul, the brass ringing merrily as he filled the beast's belly with lead. One of the other surviving direwolves had gotten itself stuck on one of the many carved pikes that had been shoved into the ground. Troopers danced around it, stabbing it with bayonets in the neck and chest while avoiding its bared fangs and flailing paws.
Get out of the fucking way!
One of the mortarmen screamed from atop the high cover of the hill, and those below sprinted away from the stuck direwolf. They pointed the tube at a negative angle, held aloft by quickly stacked sandbags, and the loader wound back his arm, ready to shot put the round down the tube. Not the greatest or most logical idea, but such things came from the minds of the irregular. By some miracle, the round managed to connect with the firing pin at the bottom of the tube, perhaps due to the look of the barrel being so worn, and the mortar boomed, sending its crew flying backwards as it spun through the air. The round itself hit the direwolf dead center, and the explosion was tinged red as pieces of bone and fur were blown all over the camp and those who were too slow to get away in time. Coco brought down his direwolf after someone slammed a grenade inside its torn stomach, blowing it in half and showering both him and 20 other troopers in gore and thick ropey intestines. Yule reloaded his pistol and dashed forward, sliding under the stricken direwolf and pumping rounds into the bottom of its jaw, hoping the skull was weaker on the bottom than the top. The direwolf gave a gurgle, a long, drawn-out whine, then settled its dying head on top of Yule. Yule decocked the hammer on his M9 and looked around, checking for wounded, and saw that while many had flesh wounds, no one had died as far as he could see. A lot of people were scared out of their fucking minds, but they were alive, and that's what counted.
If they're alive, put them down.
Coco shouted, and a few of the volunteers with larger calibers walked out and began emptying entire magazines directly into the skulls of any direwolves that even twitched when they approached. Cole was squatting down beside one that lay dead further away, staring at it in fascination as he ran his hand along its bloody neck fur. This one had gone down by a lucky 50 cal to the top of its skull and was mostly intact.
Jesus Christ.
Cole whispered when he managed to actually get his hand around one of its paws and admired the claws of it. It was with little doubt that these were the things that tore that rescue team apart when they came through the veil in search of the lost kid. They wouldn't have even had a chance with how fast these giant wolves were, and as soon as the massive paws had gotten onto their target, there was no coming back from a swipe like that. When the sniper team finally arrived, Fort Kickass was attempting to haul the more torn apart direwolves off and away while the machine guns looked on, other volunteers having gone to the process of trying to skin the ones that were mostly intact and having a hell of a time of it. The dire wolves were so large that some of the volunteers had shucked their clothes and now looked like blood-covered gremlins as they scrambled over their carcasses to cut and saw away the hides. Others were getting looked over by the medics, pulling and plucking shards of bone from their bodies or setting broken limbs. Yule saw the sniper team loitering near the most forward trench and waved them over, once again finding him with a pouch of coffee in hand. "Any good news, I hope?" Yule murmured over the din of more digging and the occasional volunteer lumbering around with ammo cans.
Yeah,
Chicks panted softly, her face bright and happy.
we found elves!
Yule raised his eyebrows, teeth gripping the top of a sugar packet mid-tear. Coco had arrived as well, wiping what looked like bloody water away from his face. Both of them said the word
Elves?
At the same time, the inflections of their responses standing apart from each other. While Coco seemed excited, Yule seemed hesitant. The sniper team gave the report while Chick showed them the many pictures she had taken on her phone, giving the two commanders more or less a general overview of the village. Neither of them were particularly happy to hear that the village had overheard the gunfire of them battling the direwolves. Coco nudged Yule with his elbow, causing him to almost fumble the open sugar packet.
It's only a matter of time before they come over here. Humans are curious enough as it is.
Yule stared down angrily at the coffee pouch in his hand as he slowly tipped the sugar packet down into it, tapping the small packet on the rim of the pouch. To be quite frank, he was terrified of meeting elves. The thought alone had plagued him for days as he prepared to head into the Vale. If every myth was to be true, they're heading into the lair of apex predators a few notches above a normal human. If things went south, they would no longer hold the advantage, and God forbid if a volunteer died and somehow the elves got a hold of their weapon. Yule could appreciate Coco's enthusiasm, but he'd be damned if the idea didn't make him pucker so hard he could pass as a submarine when he closed his mouth. The two co-commanders talked it over for quite some time, both of them explaining the reservations or objections when it came to the elves that the sniper team had found. In the end, Coco won the bout, with much groaning about it from Yule. The next day, both of them handpicked 10 volunteers to travel with them to the village. Yule picked up his rifle, put on his entire combat kit, and tugged his olive drab green patrol cap on snugly. When he walked out of his hooch, Coco and the squad of volunteers they had put together were almost vibrating from the excitement coursing through their bodies, 20 pairs of eyes wide open and waiting for the order to move out. Yule narrowed his eyes and pointed at a rifleman in the rear who was carrying something that would be of no help on this particular mission. "That fucking body pillow stays here, Brady." And that is the end of Chapter 2 of the Veil Riders Book 1, Mark 2. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk and share the story with those you think will enjoy it. Word of mouth, that's a lot of good here. Until we see you next time on this side of the veil. That was Amanda, that was Simba, that was Fire, that was Technoward, that was Hailey, that was Rue, and we'll see you next time.